Hi, everyone. Welcome to AP Gov, and we're going to be talking about the Declaration of Independence tonight. I'll apologize for my voice going in and out. I've been kind of losing it. I have a cold. I'm in New Jersey, and our weather keeps fluctuating back and forth. But I have an exciting conversation for you about the Declaration of Independence tonight. I'm hoping to make this as interactive as possible and to get you all talking as well. So feel free to use the chat area. Definitely ask questions. I'm going to try after each slide as best as I can to get to as many questions as I can, because I do want to get you all involved in this conversation we're going to have going. So just to get started for us today, hit us up on social media at ThinkFiveable, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Definitely interact with us on all those different outlets. And just to give you a heads up on where we're going this week, we have a lot of AP Gov conversations taking place. This is a huge week for lots of live sessions. So tomorrow you can check out the powers expressed, implied, concurrent, denied, 7 p.m. Eastern. Wednesday, it's going to be Congress Part 2. I'll be leading that conversation about the committee system, and that'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern. Then on Thursday, we have 2 sessions, Types of Federalism, Part 1, at 7. And then I'll be back again with Constitutional Convention at 8 o'clock. And then on Friday night, Congress Part 1, House versus the Senate, and that will be at 8 o'clock. So definitely check those out. All great introductions to the AP Gov course. So again, we're talking about the Declaration of Independence today, and a big part of the Declaration of Independence is understanding how we even got to the Declaration of Independence. So that's some of the stuff we'll be talking about in this stream. We'll also really break it down, looking at the introduction, the preamble, the indictment of King George, the denunciation of the British people, and then the conclusion of the Declaration of Independence. And we're really going to analyze all the different things and all the different parts, because when you look at the Declaration of Independence, it really breaks it down for you as far as they kind of like when you think about writing a 5-paragraph essay, right? That's almost in a sense what our founding fathers were doing with the Declaration. So let's talk about how we got here. And this beginning part, I really like as best as we can to make it interactive. So yeah, we know taxes were involved right after the French and Indian War. They started passing a bunch of taxes, kind of recoup all the money that they had spent fighting in the British had spent fighting in the French and Indian War. But there are a lot of also other acts and different things as well. Sorry, my cats just jumped on my screen there. All right, so let me get you all interacting. Tell me a little bit what you might know about the Intolerable Acts, First Continental Congress, or Common Sense. So throw out anything you might know about any of those right now, please. And I'm going to try to find. I lost my chat. Here we go. So anything you might know about the Intolerable Acts, why they were passed, what event led to the passing of the Intolerable Acts, what they were. Anyone want to jump in? All right, I'll get us started then. So if you recall, the Boston Tea Party takes place, right? Oh, okay, thank you, Quinn, for jumping in. Awesome. So we have the Boston Tea Party that takes place, and Britain's obviously going to be very upset over all that loss of tea. And so they're going to fire back by passing the Intolerable Acts against Parliament, against our colonists. And with those Intolerable Acts, it's really going to be different from other pieces of legislation that we've seen Parliament pass. It's hitting the economic freedom of our colonists, but it's also hitting at their political rights and their legislative independence as well. So one thing that the Intolerable Acts does, it closes the port of Boston, so that's hitting them economically, right? They're not going to be able to trade anymore. It's taking away their town hall meetings. And it's really taking away their representation, their right to elect representatives. So we're hitting at their political rights and their legislative rights. Slap on the fact that British soldiers are now going to be, that are accused of crimes, would have to be tried in England and not in the colony. And then throw in a quartering act forcing colonists to feed and house British soldiers. And you can see why they get the nickname the Intolerable Acts. So that's going to really bring us to the First Continental Congress. And it's important to like understand with that First Continental Congress, like no one at this point in time is like saying we want to break away and declare independence. The colonists at this point in time, they just want the same rights that the British citizens are guaranteed under the Magna Carta, under the English Bill of Rights. That's all they're looking for. So what we see when we have the First Continental Congress come, we see them call for a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, right? We're not talking independence. We're just saying that we want to just make the statement that only legislatures, the colonial legislatures, who we're voting for, right, who the colonists are voting for, only they have the right to tax the colonists. The parliament, who we're not electing those people in parliament, they don't have the right to tax us. And also, in the First Continental Congress, declares the Intolerable Acts unconstitutional, criticizes the king and parliament for taking away their colonial assemblies. But again, not declaring peace, like still trying to work out this situation. And that's going to bring us then to Thomas Paine and what Quinn offered us, which is, it's a pamphlet that was written. And it's basically trying to say to the colonists, listen, folks, like it's common sense that you should leave Britain. Like if you think of the whole idea of king and queens, that entire concept of king and queens is wrong, right? It should be people who are ruling themselves. And they're also saying use your common sense in the sense of, you're angry at Parliament, but at the same time, like your British citizens keep voting these same Parliament members in over and over and over again. So like in a sense, you should be angry at the British citizens because they're not doing anything to help you either. And so common sense actually like hit home with a lot of people, and people start saying, oh, this is starting to make a lot of sense as to maybe we should start rethinking or reevaluating our relationship with Britain. And then that'll bring us to the Second Continental Congress. Again, this point in time, still not ready to declare independence. Goes so far as even to offer an olive branch petition, saying like we're seeking peace. We just need to reestablish our relationship. But the king basically ignores the olive branch petition, and the king ends up sending 20,000 more troops to the colonies. At this point in time, like there's no hope. We're going to end up in war. But the colonies did try. So that's how we got here. Let's look at the Declaration itself now. So the Declaration is divided into a bunch of different parts. So we'll start off with part 1, which is just the basic introduction to the Declaration of Independence. And in this introduction, they're really identifying the point of the Declaration. And what they're saying is the point of the Declaration is to really declare their independence. They're not trying to get people to pick sides. They're just making a general announcement. Hey, what's up? We've decided to declare independence, right? It's very different sometimes than what we see in our politics today, where everything is about posturing and trying to persuade people. That's not what they were trying to do with the Declaration of Independence. And from the get-go, because of that, we really see there's a whole philosophical meaning behind the Declaration of Independence. The fact that they're really trying to keep an objective viewpoint as they're working through their reasons for this declaration that they're announcing. They also use the word necessary, and necessary might not mean nothing to us now, but back then that was actually a huge word to use, because basically it means that like this is inevitable. Like we have no other choice but to do this. And it's justifiable because we have no other choice. We've tried to avoid this, but we're kind of in the crosshairs at this point in the sense of there is really nothing else we can possibly do to reconcile with Britain. And so it's huge in the sense that, and one thing that Thomas Jefferson, when he's writing this, he takes into account is he knows that other countries are going to be looking at this. He knows that they're going to be looking at the wording that's used, and he wants to make sure when other countries are looking at this, they're fully understanding the scope of the problem we have had with Britain for years and years and years, and that they're fully understanding that it's not one small little issue that has led to this problem, but we're talking about years and years and years of abuse. And that's going to really bring us into the preamble section of the Declaration of Independence. Before I move into the preamble section, any basic questions that anyone might have at this point? All right, so I'm going to continue, but again, feel free to throw those questions onto the side there. So the preamble is probably the most famous part of the Declaration. It's probably the part that most of you have heard before, starting with we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. You know, this is the basis of the colonies declaring independence. It's really the basis and the formation and the heart of our country and our government today when you think about it. But if you read through that preamble, a lot of it you're going to see, again, comes from a very philosophical viewpoint, and a lot of the philosophy is coming from John Locke. So John Locke specifically, you know, he talks about the fact that humans, we have the right to certain protections. Now, John Locke refers to them as life, health, liberty, and possessions. And he says it's kind of nature's law that we have these rights, these certain rights that everyone is born with, and that governments and no one can take away from us. Jefferson, we're going to see he alters the words a little bit. So he's going to use the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but still the same concept that John Locke was trying to get across. Locke also very much so agrees with the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings is the idea that kings kind of hold absolute power, you know, with the idea that God basically put the king on the throne, and so their power comes from God himself. And what John Locke is saying is absolutely not. It's this whole idea of consent of the governed. The fact that we as people are, in a sense, are signing like a contract with our ruler, and we're giving that ruler permission to govern us, with the idea that that ruler is going to protect our rights and keep us safe. And the whole concept being, once that consent is broken, so once that ruler goes against protecting our rights or taking away our freedoms, at that point when that contract is broken, we have no choice but to rebel. And that goes for anybody, not just the colonies. Jefferson is kind of, in a sense, writing a letter that he knows other countries are going to be looking at as well. And we'll talk about the impact as far as how this did impact other countries in the future. But again, it's that idea of the consent of the governed. We give our consent to be governed with the understanding that our rights are going to be protected by doing so. But in the true sense of the word, the power comes from us, the people, because we, the people, are the ones who are giving our consent. And without our consent, the government has absolutely no power. Jefferson goes on, you know, as he's talking about the preamble, he refers to the long train of abuses and usurpations. So that's a quote directly from the preamble, the Declaration of Independence. And again, what he's trying to say here is it's not one small thing that led us to declare independence. We're talking about years and years of abuses, right? So think about all those different taxes, the Stamp Act, the sugar tax, all those different taxes that came out that hurt the colonists. And Jefferson is purposely saying that fact that it is a long train of abuses and usurpations because he knows other countries are looking, and he doesn't want other countries to revolt after one little thing that the government might do, right? You can't just revolt over one small thing. It has to be years and years and years, these long trains of abuses, before you as a people should rise up against your government. Again, because of he knows the influence it's going to have on later revolutions. That's why he takes that stand. And we're going to see as we move in history, and depending what histories you've studied already, you probably know that it is going to lead to things such as the French Revolution later on. It's going to look at this. Revolutions down in Haiti will look at this. So there will be impacts because of the Declaration of Independence, and Jefferson was very careful about that. People criticize Jefferson for this preamble, and anytime any historical document's going to be written, right, you're always going to have your critics out there who will criticize it. But specifically for why it's criticized, a lot of people say that the whole idea of consent of the governed isn't an idea during this period in time specifically that is something that is relevant or something that was feasible. A lot of people actually didn't have trust necessarily in the common people to make the best of decisions. Stay tuned for the Constitutional Convention conversation in the Electoral College on Thursday, and that will make a little bit more sense. But a lot of people, are just throwing it back to, even though John Locke said, no, it's a bad idea, that divine right of kings, right? And so Jefferson did receive a lot of criticism for his preamble to the Declaration of Independence. Questions? I know this is a meaty and hefty topic here. All right, we'll keep plugging forward then. So the next part of the Declaration of Independence, this is those lists of grievances. And this is literally where one by one, Thomas Jefferson lists all the different abuses, so to speak, that the British Parliament, the British King, British citizens committed against the colonists. In total, there's going to be 27 of them that are going to be listed. And basically, it's just showing how tyrannical the British government was. And so it's kind of broken down in a sense. So if you look at the first 12 abuses, that's really looking at King George III and how he was a tyrannical leader and how he basically was trying to take away their representative government that they had set up when they first established the colonies, and how he was turning it more into authoritarian government. And we see that if you look at those 12 abuses, it's going to talk about how he interferes with their legislative process by dissolving their colonial bodies, again, going back to those Intolerable Acts, how he tries to replace colonial governments with, his appointed ministers, people who are his henchmen, so to speak, who are going to do his deeds and what he wants. How he takes away the whole idea of no taxation without representation, right? The fact that they really want to be represented to talk about the taxes that are going to be placed against them. They even talk about how he takes this whole authoritarian government to their judicial process. So again, going back to those Intolerable Acts and the fact that some of the Intolerable Acts talked about if British soldiers committed crimes in the colonies, they would have the option to go back to England for their trial, and for the judicial system in the colonies not to hear it. So colonists see that as a huge violation of their judicial powers. He also made it so judges, the king was really the one appointing the judges, and the judges were basically dependent on the king for their jobs and their salaries. So the colonists kind of had this fear that because of that, the judges would rule in a certain way just to appease and keep the king happy. They talk about, again, with these abuses against King George, that he kept a strong military presence within the colonies. So if you think of things like the Boston Massacre, right? One of the reasons it occurred was because of the strong military presence in the colonies. They kept them there during times of peace, so he's trying to almost make the militia and the power of the civil government really weak in comparison to the military government that he's sending in by having this strong military presence within the colonies. If you move into abuses 13 through 22, that's going to look more at Parliament and the abuses that the colonists saw being committed by Parliament. And so a lot of their abuses, again, is similar to the ones that they named by King George in a sense, but talking about the fact that you're taking away our self-rule, right? We believe in a representative government, and you're taking away that self-rule. And so they go into listing one by one the ways in which Parliament did this. So they talk about the laws that Parliament passed as far as quartering of the troops, when they closed the port of Boston, so shutting off trade. They talk about taking away the right to trial by jury, forcing colonists to be tried in England, no taxation without the representation. So the fact that it's our colonial legislatures that should be the ones passing the taxes and not British Parliament. So all these different things that they kind of considered taking away their power from their legislative power. They're looking at Parliament and listing those abuses. And then the last few abuses, if you look at the last 5 abuses, again, it's kind of referring to specific actions that the King of Britain took. And they're basically saying, in a sense, that the King of Britain basically abandoned them and was almost starting a war against the colonists. So they talked about how the king was using, specifically referring to Lexington and Concord at this point, because Lexington and Concord has taken place. So talking about how the king is using the military to basically suppress the rebellion that has started again, referring to Lexington and Concord. Also saying that the king is sending the troops to basically burn towns, attack different towns, attack ships, and just almost destroy the economic lives of the colonists. It refers to the king hiring foreign mercenaries. So you can see he hires Hessians, which are German mercenaries, and that he's not helping any longer the colonists get protected from Native American attacks. And it's just causing this basic infighting and rebellion against each other. So they're listing, again, one by one, and this goes back to the preamble. We want to show you, we're not just going to say we have this long train of abuses. We're going to show you that we literally have this long train of abuses, and we're going to lay them out one by one by one. And that's exactly what they did in this part of the Declaration of Independence by listing those specific abuses. Questions? You all are super quiet, and I know there's a bunch of you out there watching, so any questions? And I know I talk fast, so anything out there? All right, we can keep moving forward then. So it goes on to denunciation of the British people. So this is basically where they want to be known, okay, not only was there this long train of abuses that took place against us, which we just got done listing all of them, but we also want the world to know that we did try to work this situation out peacefully, right? We didn't just jump to a violent manner to get this done. And that was super important that the colonists really want the world to know about this, that they have used these nonviolent means. They've used petitions. They had the first Continental Congress and the second Continental Congress that in the beginning tried to reach out to the king, tried to reach out to Parliament, tried to reach out to the British citizens, to try to do anything that they could to possibly avoid the war. But each attempt that they were making for these peaceful negotiations was always met by either ignoring the attempt, so sometimes the king literally was just pay no attention, or two, sending more British soldiers to the colonies, which obviously isn't going to help the situation. That's just going to ramp up the tension that's already present. So again, trying to just lay that picture out of what was happening, knowing once again, the world is watching this. The world is going to kind of follow through as to what's happening. And so we want the world to see that, yes, we have a list of 27 abuses, but two, we also tried to solve this peacefully, which didn't in the long run end up working. And then, just go back here. So the short and long-term impacts of the Declaration of Independence, one is obviously going to be the American Revolution, right? So we're going to jump into the American Revolution full force. Yes, Lexington and Concord, technically, first battle of the American Revolution takes place before we've declared our independence. But with this declaration, it's just going to obviously bring the full American Revolution into force. We're going to see that all the different colonies will now at this point in time start forming their own constitutions. And a lot of them within their own constitutions are going to include a Bill of Rights, looking at some of the rights that they felt as though Parliament and the King had taken away from them. And a lot of those rights, again, if you go back to those 27 abuses that were listed in the Declaration of Independence, you're going to kind of see those listed as rights that they want to make sure that the citizens of their colonies are going to be guaranteed. Women, slaves, and Native Americans, life is going to change dramatically for all three groups. So women, we're going to see that women do get involved in the American Revolution. A lot of them, served as nurses, served on the sidelines. Some of them dressed up as men to fight. But we're going to see that women are really left out of the Declaration of Independence, right? So we're saying all men are created equal. Well, we're not including women in that. And so we're going to see that women, after a Declaration of Independence, will push for their own rights. Abigail Adams famously writes to her husband saying to remember the ladies. And we'll see that the Seneca Falls Convention, which will take place in 1848, which is the Women's Rights Convention, will model their own Declaration of Independence, so to speak, which will be modeled along the framework of our Declaration of Independence that we're talking about today. Slaves, again, we have that phrase, all men are created equal. Not so for slaves at all. Unfortunately, when we see the American Revolution take place, we're going to see as our country forms that slavery is going to become even more dramatic within our country. The numbers of slaves will dramatically increase. And again, when we get into our Constitution, we'll see that the rights of slaves are completely left out of our Constitution. Slavery is actually guaranteed in our Constitution. Another kind of watch Thursday night's session on the Constitutional Convention, because we're going to get more into that. But just understand, we're talking about a group here that was completely left out, even though we're using the phrase all men are created equal. Native Americans also, things will change dramatically for the Native Americans. After the French and Indian War, Native Americans started to see things change for them when the French were gone and the British colonists started pushing more into those French lands, or those lands that used to be owned by the French. Things will become worse for the Native Americans in the sense that now that Britain can no longer hold them back from that proclamation line of 1763, we're going to see the British try to, the colonists, the Americans at this point in time, try to extend their land even further, which is going to be pushing the Native Americans even more off the land. And then obviously, as we go through American history, we're going to see various treaties, various wars waged against Native Americans. And so again, all men are created equal. We're not including Native Americans in that statement. Revolutions in other countries, I mentioned this early, Haiti, the French. We're going to see various revolutions take place in countries. They're going to model it in a sense on the philosophy that was used in the Declaration of Independence, specifically in that preamble, where it's talking about the fact that people are born with natural rights, and that those natural rights cannot be taken away. And our declaration, long-term impact, huge influence on our country today, right? Still greatly influences our laws, the decisions that our government leaders make. How many times, if you watch the news, do you still hear it quoted about all men being created equal? How many times, if you go to DC on their license plate, do you see that concept of no taxation without representation? So all these different issues that we saw either lead to the Declaration of Independence or that were in the Declaration of Independence itself, all those different things are still influencing our country greatly today. And we could have a whole conversation about, whether in our country today, are we living up to the tenets of that Declaration of Independence? Are all men created equal? All men and women, I should say, created equal in our country today? And if we had to, which would make for an interesting conversation, if we had to think of the abuses today, what abuses might citizens put today that they feel are being done by the government? That's taking us away from that concept of all men being created equal, that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as Jefferson said. So, folks, this is the Declaration. I flew through it without any questions, but I'm happy to take questions and break this down a little bit more. If there's anything that I went over that someone wants to jump a little bit more into, please let me know. Just type it in that chat. Very good question. So the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. Technically, if you want to be a real history dork, technically it was done on July 3rd, but it wasn't announced to the public until July 4th, 1776, which is why we celebrate July 4th. But those of us who are true history dorks like to do a 2-day Independence Day celebration and also celebrate on July 3rd as well. I mean, 2 days of a cookout, you can't go wrong with that, right? Also, 56 men signed it, just in case. I mean, I don't think that's anything that would ever appear on the test. But 56 men did sign the Declaration of Independence. And what's interesting is when you think about these men who signed this document, In a sense, they're committing treason, right? They're going against their government. They're taking a stand against their government and declaring independence. So that's a crime punishable by death. And so it kind of blows my mind when I think about it, because I don't know if there's anything that I feel so strongly about that I would put my name on, knowing my punishment could be death, right? But these 56 men had such a strong sense of conviction about being mistreated, about having self-rule, self-representation, and they believed that much in it, that they signed their names. And famously, John Hancock, if you ever look at the Declaration of Independence and the signatures, John Hancock's signature is huge, because he said he wanted to sign it so the king wouldn't have to put his spectacles, his glasses on, to read John Hancock's name. So that's why if people ever say to you, just give me your John Hancock, it's because of John Hancock, and the way he signed the Declaration of Independence. Other questions, thoughts, analysis? What was the most interesting thing? It looks like there's 4 of you watching live. So what was the most interesting tidbit that you picked up tonight? Anyone have an interesting, the breakdown of the abuses? All right, very cool. Yeah, it's very interesting when you look at the breakdown of the abuses. Not a lot of people take time to think about that. The intolerable acts, which, by the way, sometimes on the exam, the true word is the coercive acts, which I had in the one slide. The colonists gave it the nickname the intolerable acts because they saw the 5 laws that were bumped together as just being completely intolerable, so to speak. Are you all currently in AP American Gov now, or do you start in the spring? Or are you taking now? Okay. Very cool. Yeah, my school where I teach, we're doing AP Comparative Government now, and then we do the AP US part in the spring. Jam them with both of them. Any other questions? And it could be events leading up to the Declaration and the Declaration itself. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Nothing? All right, I'm just gonna then give you all peeks once again at the different events coming up this week. So again, lesson on the powers, looking at the express powers, implied powers, concurrent powers, and denied powers. That's looking more at the legislative branch. Wednesday, Congress Part 2, the committee system. So we will be breaking down the committee system and what committees are, subcommittees, how people are assigned to them, what is it that committees even do, how are they important in the legislative process. We'll be looking at, on Thursday, dual versus cooperative federalism. And then also on Thursday, the Constitutional Convention, which basically takes us from, we had the Articles of Confederation, we need to tweak them because they're just not working out, and how we get our government that we have today. So we're really going to break down all the different compromises and everything that comes to create our Constitution that we have today. And then on Friday, there'll be an awesome lesson on Congress and the differences between the House and the Senate, which is so relevant to everything that's going on in our country today. With our Declaration of Independence, though, do you all think, those of you who are out there, do you all think that we are living up to our Declaration of Independence today? Yes. All right, Quinn, you do. Awesome. Why? And it could be just a quick, short why or a longer why. I mean, we definitely live up to the idea of representative government, right? Like we're all voting, and we're even more of a representative government today than when our country first started. Because when our country first started, we didn't get to vote for our senators. But now we get to vote for our senators. So in that sense, for sure, definitely living up to some of those promises in that Declaration of Independence. Anyone else want to throw in an answer there? All right, folks. Well, if there are no questions, I'm going to end up ending this broadcast, but I would love to answer questions if you have some. All right. So again, check out the rest of our live broadcasts this week. And as always, you know where you can find us on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on YouTube. I hope you all have an awesome night. I'll be back on Wednesday with the committee system. Hopefully my voice will fully be back by then. And then I'll also be back on Thursday with the Constitutional Convention, and my voice better be definitely back by then. All right. Thanks for joining and have an awesome night. Should be ending. It's still taping. And my internet is really